The emergency lights pulsed in sync with the alarm as the starship Helios limped through space, its hull breached and systems failing. Keith Zeller gripped the command console, blood streaming from a gash on his forearm where a panel had exploded during the asteroid collision. The ship's AI had managed to stabilize their trajectory, but the damage was extensive, and Keith knew they needed help. Mayday, mayday. This is Earth research vessel Helios requesting immediate assistance. We've sustained critical damage and have wounded crew, Keith broadcast on all frequencies. Hoping someone would hear them in this remote sector of the Andromeda cluster, sweat mingled with blood as he worked frantically to restore communications. The wound on his arm throbbed painfully, but he didn't have time to deal with it. 3 of his 6 crew members were unconscious in various parts of the ship, and the other 2 were struggling to contain the damage to the life support systems. After 20 minutes of desperate broadcasting, the communications panel lit up with an incoming transmission. Earth vessel, this is Medbay Station Xorix. We have received your distress call and can offer assistance. Our station is within your current trajectory, approximately 42 minutes at your current velocity. Please transmit crew medical status. Relief washed over Keith. The Xorians were known throughout the galaxy as exceptional medical practitioners, despite their somewhat skittish nature when it came to dealing with unfamiliar species. Xorix Station, thank you. We have 5 human crew members injured, 1 critically. I'm transmitting our biometric data now. Keith struggled to stay conscious as he guided the damaged ship toward the coordinates transmitted by the Xorian station. The bleeding from his arm had slowed but not stopped, and he had tied a makeshift tourniquet using a torn piece of his uniform. The pain was becoming harder to ignore, but he forced himself to focus on the navigation console. When the gleaming structure of Medbay Station Xorix finally appeared on the viewscreen, Keith nearly wept with relief. The station was a marvel of alien architecture, with sweeping curves of iridescent metal that reminded him of the inside of a seashell. Multiple docking bays extended like petals from its central core. Helios, this is docking control. We have prepared emergency Bay 5 for your arrival. Medical teams are standing by. The docking procedure was mercifully simple, with the station's tractor beams doing most of the work. As the airlock sealed with a reassuring hiss, Keith finally allowed himself to slump in his chair. His vision was becoming blurry around the edges, and he knew he was close to passing out from blood loss. The airlock door slid open to reveal 3 Xorians in what appeared to be medical attire. They were tall, slender beings with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the lights. Their large, almond-shaped eyes dominated their faces, and they had 4 long fingers on each hand. Keith had met Xorians before during diplomatic functions, but never in a medical setting. The lead Xorian rushed forward, its movements fluid and graceful despite its obvious alarm. "Human Captain, you are severely injured. Why did you not include yourself in the medical report?" Keith attempted to stand but swayed dangerously. "My crew comes first, 3 unconscious in engineering and 2 with minor injuries in the crew quarters." The Xorian medical team split up, with 2 rushing deeper into the ship while the lead physician stayed with Keith. The alien produced a handheld scanner and passed it over Keith's body, its large eyes widening at the readings. "You have lost a dangerous amount of blood." "We must treat this wound immediately," the Xorian said, its voice melodic but clearly stressed. "I am Medical Director Varen. Please remain still while I assess the damage." Keith nodded, finally allowing himself to acknowledge how terrible he felt. The room was spinning slightly, and the cold sweat on his skin made him shiver. Varen gently helped him to a floating stretcher that had appeared in the doorway. As they moved through the station toward what Keith assumed was their emergency treatment area, he could see other Xorian medical staff rushing to and from his ship, carrying his injured crew members. Despite his fading consciousness, he noted how carefully they handled his team. The treatment room was unlike any hospital Keith had seen. The walls pulsed with soft bioluminescence, and the medical equipment looked more like art installations than tools. Varen and another Xorian gently transferred Keith to an examination table that molded to fit his body perfectly. "We will begin treatment immediately," Varen said, motioning to two assistants who approached with various instruments. "Your wound requires cleaning and sealing." Keith suddenly remembered the emergency kit in his pocket. Despite the pain and dizziness, he reached down and pulled out a small flask. "Wait," he mumbled. "Need to clean it first." Before Varen could respond, Keith unscrewed the cap of the flask and poured a generous amount of clear liquid directly onto the gash on his arm. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The three Xorians leaped backward with sounds of alarm, their eyes widening to an almost comical degree. One of them actually fell to the floor in shock. "What are you doing?" Varen screeched, the melodic quality of his voice completely gone. "You are pouring corrosive chemicals on an open wound." Keith winced at the burning sensation but shook his head. "It's just alcohol, medical grade, standard human first aid." The Xorians stared at him in horror, their slender bodies trembling. Varen approached cautiously, scanning the wound again. "You deliberately applied a caustic substance to damaged tissue," he said, clearly struggling to understand. "And you are not screaming in agony." "Burns a bit," Keith admitted, feeling light-headed from the blood loss. "But it kills bacteria, prevents infection." The three Xorians exchanged looks of disbelief. The one who had fallen was now back on his feet but keeping a safe distance. "Humans apply toxic substances to open wounds as standard practice?" Varen asked, his voice a mixture of horror and fascination. "Yeah," Keith said, his vision starting to blur more severely. "Pretty standard stuff. Got anything for the pain, though? That part's not so fun." Varen seemed to snap back into professional mode, though Keith could still see the shock in his large eyes. "Yes, of course." "Pellin, prepare a dose of neural blocker compatible with human physiology." As the assistant hurried to comply, Varen carefully examined the wound. "The alcohol has indeed sterilized the area, though in a manner we would consider extreme. We typically use targeted antimicrobial fields that do not cause additional tissue trauma." Keith tried to smile reassuringly. "Different species, different methods, but trust me, this works for us." "Clearly," Varen said, still sounding bewildered. "Your species continues to surprise the medical community. Now, please allow us to proceed with our treatment." The neural blocker, when administered, worked almost instantly. The pain in Keith's arm faded to a distant awareness, and the room stopped spinning quite so violently. He watched with interest as the Xorians applied what looked like glowing gel to his wound. The edges of the gash began to pull together without the need for sutures. "Biomolecular sealant," Varen explained, noticing Keith's interest. "It bonds with your tissue and accelerates your natural healing process while providing a protective barrier." "That's impressive," Keith said. "How long until it heals?" "With your human physiology, approximately 3 days for complete tissue regeneration. The sealant will dissolve as new tissue forms." Varen was clearly regaining his professional composure, though he still kept glancing at the flask of alcohol Keith had placed on a nearby table. "What about my crew?" Keith asked, suddenly remembering his responsibilities. "All are receiving treatment," Varen assured him. 2 had minor contusions and are already responding well. The 3 who were unconscious suffered from oxygen deprivation, but no permanent damage. They are in neural stimulation chambers to restore optimal brain function. Keith felt relief wash over him. "Thank you, we would have been in serious trouble without your help." Varen made a gesture that Keith interpreted as the Xorian equivalent of a dismissive wave. "It is our purpose to heal, though I must admit your human medical practices are concerning." "Different evolutionary paths, different solutions," Keith said. "Alcohol has been used as an antiseptic on Earth for centuries." "Fascinating," Varen replied. "And disturbing, are there other substances humans routinely apply to injuries that would alarm us?" Keith chuckled weakly. "Probably. We use all kinds of things that might seem strange to non-humans. Honey on burns, superglue to close cuts, even maggots to clean infected wounds in some cases." The color seemed to drain from Varen's already pale face. "You place insects inside wounds." "Medical-grade maggots," Keith clarified, amused by the alien's reaction. They only eat dead tissue, leaving the healthy tissue alone. It's an old technique, but effective. Varen looked like he might need medical attention himself. I believe I need to update our database on human medical practices urgently. This is unexpected. A younger Xorian rushed into the treatment room, looking agitated. Medical director, the human patients are regaining consciousness and one is asking for something called coffee. Our database suggests this is a mild neurotoxin consumed for pleasure. Keith couldn't help laughing, which sent a twinge of pain through his arm despite the neural blocker. That would be my chief engineer, Marco. Coffee isn't dangerous to us, just stimulating. Varen sighed, a surprisingly human-like gesture. I see we have much to learn about your species' unusual relationship with substances that would be considered hazardous to most sentient life forms. Maybe we can exchange medical knowledge during our stay, Keith suggested. Our ship will need repairs before we can continue our mission. That would be educational, Varen agreed, though I suspect our medical staff may require some preparation before witnessing more human first aid techniques. As Keith rested on the examination table, he could see more Xorian medical personnel peering curiously into the room, whispering among themselves. Word had clearly spread about the human who casually poured alcohol on an open wound. You've become something of a medical curiosity, Varen noted, following Keith's gaze. Many of our staff have never treated humans before. Happy to educate, Keith said, feeling the neural blocker making him slightly drowsy, though I hope you don't mind if I rest a bit first. Of course, Varen said. Rest is essential for recovery. We will check on your crew and begin a more thorough assessment of your vessel's damage. As Varen and his assistants left the room, Keith heard them already engaged in animated discussion about human physiology and what they termed counterintuitive medical practices. Despite the pain and the situation, Keith smiled as he drifted into sleep. He awoke several hours later feeling significantly better. The neural blocker had worn off, but the pain in his arm had reduced to a dull ache. Looking down, he saw that the wound was now covered with a translucent film that pulsed gently with a soft blue light. It is monitoring your healing progress, came Varen's voice from the doorway. The Xorian medical director entered, followed by a group of what appeared to be medical students, all staring at Keith with undisguised curiosity. How are my crew? Keith asked, sitting up carefully. All recovering well, Varen assured him. Your chief engineer Marco has consumed 3 cups of your coffee substance, which we synthesized after analyzing its components. He insists it is essential for his cognitive function. Keith laughed. That sounds like Marco, any word on the ship. Our engineers have begun assessment, Varen said. The damage is significant but repairable. However, I must inform you that we have a more immediate situation to address. Keith tensed. What kind of situation? Varen gestured to the group behind him. These are medical trainees who have requested permission to learn about human first aid practices directly from you. After witnessing your alcohol application, they are most eager to understand the reasoning behind human medical traditions. Keith relaxed and nodded. I'd be happy to explain, though I'm no doctor. One of the younger Xorians stepped forward, holding a data pad. Is it true that humans deliberately expose themselves to weakened pathogens to build immunity? Our records indicate a practice called vaccination. Yes, that's standard preventative medicine where I come from, Keith confirmed. Another trainee asked, and humans consume ethanol regularly for recreational purposes despite its toxic properties, Keith chuckled. We call it drinking and yes, in moderation. The questions continued, each revealing the Xorians' mixture of horror and fascination with human medical and social practices. Keith answered as best he could, occasionally having to explain that not everything humans did was strictly medical in nature. What I find most interesting, Varen interjected after a particularly animated discussion about human pain tolerance, is the casual nature with which you treated your own serious injury. Our scans indicated you had lost almost 20% of your total blood volume, yet you prioritized your crew and then administered a treatment that caused additional pain. Keith shrugged. That's just standard procedure. The captain takes care of the crew first. A cultural value as well as a medical practice, Varen noted. Fascinating. After the impromptu lecture session, Varen dismissed the trainees and helped Keith to his feet. Your crew has asked to see you. Do you feel strong enough to walk? I think so, Keith said, taking a few experimental steps. He felt weak but stable. They made their way through the gleaming corridors of the medical station, passing Xorians who stopped to stare at the human visitor. Keith realized that this remote station might not get many human patients. The crew quarters assigned to the Helios team were spacious and comfortable, though clearly designed for beings with different proportions. Marco, the chief engineer, was the first to spot Keith. "Captain, you're up," Marco exclaimed, rushing over. He looked relatively unharmed except for some bruising on his face. "These Xorian docs are amazing. They fixed my cracked ribs in hours." The rest of the crew gathered around, all looking remarkably recovered given the state they had been in when they arrived. Lieutenant Samantha Chen still had a healing device attached to her temple, and Navigator Tom Reynolds had his leg elevated, but everyone was conscious and alert. "The captain gave our medical staff quite a shock," Varen told the assembled humans, pouring alcohol directly onto an open wound. Marco laughed. "Let me guess, you broke out the emergency whiskey, medical-grade alcohol," Keith corrected, though he smiled. "Though whiskey would have worked in a pinch," Samantha shook her head. "The look on their faces when they were treating my head wound and I asked for aspirin was priceless. You'd think I'd asked for poison. To many species, your medications would be exactly that," Varen pointed out. "Your human physiology is remarkably resilient to substances that would severely harm most sentient beings." Tom raised what appeared to be a cup of synthesized coffee. "To human hardiness and alien medicine, a great combination." The group laughed, and even Varen made a sound that Keith interpreted as amused. Over the next few days, Keith and his crew became something of celebrities on the medical station. Word had spread throughout the facility about the humans' unusual medical practices and apparent tolerance for substances that would be considered dangerous by Xorian standards. Keith found himself frequently answering questions from curious medical staff about everything from human dietary habits to emergency first aid techniques. The Xorians were particularly fascinated by the concept of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, which they found both primitive and ingenious. "You physically compress the chest to manually pump blood?" one medical trainee asked, looking both horrified and impressed. "And this does not cause additional injury?" "Well, it can crack ribs," Keith admitted, "but that's better than the alternative." The exchange of medical knowledge went both ways. Keith and his crew learned about Xorian medical technology, much of which was far advanced beyond Earth standards. They used targeted molecular reconstruction rather than surgery for most internal injuries, and their understanding of neural pathways allowed them to block pain with remarkable precision. By the 5th day, Keith's wound had healed completely, leaving only a faint line where the deep gash had been. The Xorian biomolecular sealant had worked perfectly, and Varen was pleased with the results. "Your tissue regeneration rate is impressive even by human standards," Varen noted during a final examination, "though I still maintain that applying alcohol to the wound was unnecessary trauma." Keith smiled. "Old habits, but I've seen enough of your methods to be convinced there are better ways." The repairs to the Helios were also progressing well. The Xorian engineers had reinforced the damaged hull sections and replaced the fried components in the life support and propulsion systems. They estimated another 2 days before the ship would be space-worthy again. That evening, Keith joined Varen in what the Xorians called a nutrition chamber, but was essentially a cafeteria. The food had been synthesized to match human nutritional needs, though the textures and flavors were slightly off. "I've been reviewing our database on human medical history," Varen said as they ate. "Your species has an incredible record of medical innovation despite limited technology. Particularly impressive is how you developed effective treatments using natural compounds before you understood their molecular properties." Keith nodded. "Humans are good at trial and error, sometimes more error than we'd like to admit." There is something I've been meaning to ask, Varen said, leaning forward slightly. When you first applied the alcohol to your wound, was the pain significant? Keith considered the question. Yes, it burned quite badly, but it's a pain we're taught to expect, so we tolerate it. Fascinating, Varen murmured. Expected pain is processed differently in the brain than unexpected pain, but still. The casual nature with which you handled it was remarkable. I was also in shock and had lost a lot of blood, Keith admitted. That probably dulled my reaction somewhat. Varen made a gesture of understanding. Context is important. Still, you've given our medical community much to consider regarding pain tolerance and treatment methodologies across species. As they continued their meal, an alarm suddenly blared throughout the station. Varen jumped up, his large eyes widening in alarm. Emergency protocol activated, announced a calm voice over the station's communication system. Containment breach in Laboratory 7. All personnel implement infection control procedures immediately. Varen's blue skin seemed to pale further. This is serious. Laboratory 7 contains research samples of Nevalian plague. Keith felt a chill run down his spine. Nevalian plague was notorious throughout the galaxy as a devastating disease that had wiped out colonies on 3 different planets before a treatment was developed. Is there anything I can do to help? Keith asked, already standing. Varen hesitated, then nodded. Actually, yes. The containment systems require manual override from 3 different stations simultaneously. Most of our medical staff will be implementing quarantine protocols. Could you assist with one of the override stations? Of course, Keith said. Just tell me what to do. They rushed through corridors that were now bathed in pulsing red light. Other Xorians were moving purposefully in various directions, all wearing what appeared to be thin membrane-like coverings that Keith assumed were their version of hazmat suits. Here, Varen said, stopping at a control panel. He pressed his hand against it, and a protective covering extended over Keith. This will provide temporary protection. The override station is through that doorway. Keith followed Varen's directions to a small room containing a console with unfamiliar controls. A holographic display showed a map of the station, with a red pulsing area that he assumed was Laboratory 7. The console requires continuous pressure on the primary node while entering a sequence on the secondary inputs, Varen explained through a communication link. I am at the 2nd station, and Medical Officer Thelen is at the 3rd. We must synchronize our actions precisely. Keith placed his hand on what appeared to be the primary node, a glowing circle in the center of the console. Ready when you are, he said, trying to ignore the continued blaring of the alarm. Initiating override sequence in 3, 2, 1, now, Varen instructed. Keith followed the sequence of inputs that appeared on the display, pressing various symbols as they lit up. The process required intense concentration and precise timing. After several tense minutes, the console emitted a series of tones, and the red pulsing area on the map turned yellow. Containment protocols re-established, announced the station's communication system. Emergency status downgraded to Level 2. All personnel maintain infection control procedures until further notice. Keith exhaled in relief. Did it work? Yes, Varen replied, his voice noticeably calmer. The breach has been contained. Preliminary scans indicate no spread of pathogenic material beyond the initial containment zone. What happened? Keith asked as he exited the override room to find Varen waiting for him. A research assistant made an error in the decontamination sequence, Varen explained, leading Keith away from the affected area. The automated systems detected the breach immediately, but required manual override to implement the secondary containment protocols. Is everyone okay? The assistant and 2 researchers were exposed, Varen said grimly. They are being treated now. Fortunately, we have effective treatments for Nevalian plague if administered promptly. Keith nodded, relieved. I'm glad I could help. Your assistance was invaluable, Varen said. Few non-medical personnel would have responded so calmly in such a situation. Emergencies are part of space exploration, Keith said. You get used to staying focused under pressure. As they walked back toward the crew quarters, Keith noticed that many of the Xorians they passed were looking at him with what appeared to be a new level of respect. Word of his assistance during the containment breach had evidently spread quickly. The next morning, Keith was surprised to be summoned to the station's administrative center. Varen met him at the entrance, looking uncharacteristically formal. "The station administrator wishes to speak with you," Varen explained. "Your actions yesterday have attracted attention." Keith followed Varen into a spacious chamber where an elderly Xorian sat behind an ornate desk. Unlike the medical staff, this Xorian wore elaborate garments that seemed to shimmer with embedded technology. "Captain Zeller," the administrator said, rising to greet him. "I am Administrator Kelvin." "Please be seated." Keith sat in the offered chair, which adjusted itself to accommodate his human frame. "I have reviewed the reports of your arrival and subsequent stay at our facility," Kelvin said. "Most impressive, both your crew's survival of such a serious ship malfunction and your personal medical resilience." "Thank you," Keith said. "We're grateful for the excellent care we've received here." Kelvin made a gesture that Keith had learned was a sign of acknowledgement. "Your assistance during yesterday's containment breach was particularly noteworthy. Few visitors would involve themselves in such a potentially dangerous situation." "It seemed like the right thing to do," Keith said simply. "Indeed." Kelvin activated a holographic display showing what appeared to be official documentation. "In recognition of your service to this station, I am authorized to offer your crew priority status for any future medical needs in Xorian space, as well as a formal alliance proposal for your Earth authorities." Keith was taken aback. "That's very generous, Administrator." "It is practical," Kelvin replied. "Your species has demonstrated qualities that would make for valuable allies. Medical Director Varen has been particularly vocal about the potential benefits of deeper cooperation between our medical communities." Varen shifted slightly, seeming almost embarrassed. "The human approach to medicine is unorthodox but effective in many cases. There is much we could learn from each other." The meeting continued with discussion of the formal alliance proposal and arrangements for the Helios' departure, scheduled for the following day. When Keith finally left the administrative center, he found Varen walking alongside him. "I did not expect such a formal recognition," Keith admitted. "The administrator was genuinely impressed," Varen said. "As was I. Despite our initial shock at your medical practices, your crew has demonstrated admirable qualities during your stay. Even pouring alcohol on open wounds," Keith asked with a smile. Varen made the Xorian equivalent of a laugh. "Perhaps especially that. It demonstrated a pragmatism that we sometimes lack in our pursuit of perfect solutions." When Keith returned to the crew quarters, he found his team already celebrating the news of their new VIP status in Xorian space. "So all it took was you shocking the medical staff with some antiseptic and helping during an emergency, and now we're honored guests," Marco said, raising a cup of the synthesized coffee that had become his favorite. "Not bad, Captain." "It's more about building bridges between different approaches," Keith said. "They have amazing technology, but sometimes the simplest solutions are still effective." The final day of their stay was spent completing the repairs to the Helios and preparing for departure. The Xorian engineers had not only fixed the damage, but had made several improvements to the ship's systems that would make it more resilient in the future. As Keith supervised the final loading of supplies, Varen approached him with a small container. "A parting gift," the Xorian medical director said, handing it to Keith. "A supply of our biomolecular sealant adapted for human physiology. It should prove useful if you encounter further incidents requiring first aid." Keith accepted the container gratefully. "Thank you. This will definitely be better than pouring alcohol on wounds, though perhaps less dramatic," Varen noted with what Keith now recognized as humor. "I have also included detailed instructions and a small medical scanner calibrated for human use." "This is incredibly generous," Keith said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Consider it an investment in future cooperation," Varen replied. "And perhaps next time you visit you can demonstrate this super glue for cuts technique you mentioned. From a safe distance, of course," Keith laughed. It's a deal. The departure from Medbay Station Zorix was smooth and without incident. The Helios, now repaired and upgraded, functioned better than it had before the asteroid collision. As they pulled away from the station, Keith looked at the gleaming structure on the view screen, thinking about the unexpected connections they had made. "Course set for the Rigel system, Captain," announced Navigator Reynolds from his station. "All systems operating at optimal levels." "Well done, everyone," Keith said to his crew. "And when we file our report, make sure to include a special commendation for the Xorian medical team. I think we've made some valuable friends here." "And taught them that humans are tougher than they look," added Marco with a grin. "Not tougher," Keith corrected. "Just different. And sometimes different approaches are exactly what we all need to learn from." As the Helios accelerated away from the station, Keith made a mental note to review the Xorian medical information they had been provided. He had a feeling that the alliance between their species would prove valuable in ways they couldn't yet imagine. And if nothing else, he now had a much better option than alcohol for treating wounds in space. The stars streaked past on the viewscreen as the ship entered faster than light travel, carrying them toward their next destination. Keith touched the nearly invisible scar on his arm, a reminder of an unexpected first contact that had started with panic over a simple bottle of antiseptic and ended with a promising new alliance. In the vast expanse of space, such connections were rare and precious, built on mutual respect and the willingness to learn from differences rather than fear them. And sometimes, Keith reflected, it took a medical emergency to reveal just how similar different species could be, despite their varying approaches to healing.